Okay. Well, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Kushtrim Shaipi. I'm part of IQ Consulting, a local consulting company that does bits and pieces in a multitude of fields. We mainly do research and project management work, and I have had the opportunity to work with some of the most marginalized groups in this society, including heavy focus of work on women and women's rights, minorities, specifically Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian minorities, and of course children's rights, and particularly children with disabilities. Before I move on to sharing my views on inclusion in Kosovo, I would like to stop and discuss a little the concept of inclusion, which I personally consider is not a very natural one. That is based on human nature. I believe that people are exclusive by nature. The fact that we're social animals that live in groups, that automatically makes us exclusive, as it creates the feeling of a group and the sense of the other, of whoever is not part of the group, regardless of how the group is defined, either on ethnic terms, gender, or simple primordial group of people living together. In that sense, I believe that inclusion and the whole philosophy attached to it is part of a wider evolutionary process of human society that goes to favor the universal application of some unalienated rights that all people in the world should enjoy. Now, depending on the viewpoint, this may be broadened to include a lot more concepts and rights and privileges and obligations of people, or it can be defined narrowly. I'm not going to go into definition discussion, but this is a starting point where I want to start. Based on this view, I consider inclusion to be a bottom-up process where the excluded demand their rights and achieve them with the consent of the majority, who has realized that it's good to include the minorities, regardless of the nature of minorities that we're talking about, or marginalized groups. To this end, inclusion can be defined in terms of achieving greater social cohesion, minimizing social risks, minimizing the potential for social inequality and dissatisfaction that in some cases may even erupt in uprisings. Contrary to this, in Kosovo, we had a completely different experience in the past 12 years after the end of the war, and this whole new inclusion concept that was embedded in the entire system, as the gentleman indicated, in the Constitution, all relevant strategic documents, has been served as demands or conditions that we needed to fulfill in order to advance in some other fields. As such, this concept has alienated the biggest part of the majority population, who has perceived as unfair to sort of, when talking about ethnic inclusion, was perceived as unfair to give minorities so many rights and so many privileges and affirmative actions attached to implement those rights. Now, to this end, this kind of inclusion does not go in favor of developing a functional democracy. It does not even go to the, at the end of the day, to the improvement of the situation of these excluded groups in the society. Who is to blame for this? Well, regarding ethnic divisions and ethnic marginalization, everybody is to blame, starting from the international agencies who have perceived everything in Kosovo in terms of ethnic lines and have acted accordingly, to our institutions who have accepted these definitions and this viewpoint of the international community and have not focused on facilitating sort of grassroots or bottom-up inclusion that should have been facilitated and has been proven to work in a number of cases in Kosovo. And thirdly, the overall Kosovo society, who to this day still has not realized the importance of achieving internal cohesion within our society. Now, in order to put this whole discussion on an economic perspective, I will start with the importance of inclusion of women in the economy and the impact that it can have. Well, first of all, the development pace in a country largely depends on the ability to mobilize resources. As Kosovo, one of the biggest resources we have is human capacities, as we have a generally young population, and the vast majority of which is unemployed. I mean, if we talk about women, unemployed women, they comprise a bulk of unemployed in Kosovo, far larger percentage of the entire population of the job seekers in Kosovo, and also are inactive, in one word. If we look at the legal infrastructure and the laws and the documents created, we may come to conclude that Kosovo has probably some of the most advanced legislation in terms of inclusion. However, as I said before, this was perceived by both the society and the Kosovo institutions as homework that we need to complete, at least on paper, and we need to do a tick in it. Instead of just following blindly this agenda, more attempts, in my opinion, should have been faced on developing human potential, as said by the gentleman before me, and investing in education. That's very important. One of the major obstacles that women face to be included, even those that want to be included in the economy, comes precisely from inequalities in education. If we analyze the data on education in Kosovo, we see that the higher you go in the education level, the smaller the percentage of women attending those levels. This is linked both to economic and cultural aspects, and the cultural aspect is more particular or more important to discuss at this point in time. I mean, even, I'll give you a concrete example, even law on inheritance. It very clearly indicates that in order for the wealth or the inheritance of a deceased person to be distributed among his or her descendants, everybody in that list needs to agree on the division of that property. What happens in reality is that women are forced to sign off their rights to inheritance to their male siblings and relinquish the right to have a head start in life because they cannot get loans from banks because they have nothing to guarantee it with. They don't have economic security, so they're forced to tolerate everything their fortune brings them about in marriage or all other aspects. Inclusion of women in the economy would have been a great contribution, but as I said, given the alarming and increasing numbers of education, because in the last years they have been degrading in terms of inclusion of women in higher levels of education, that's where we should be investing. We need to create the possibility of these women to participate. And yes, added value would be that aside from their contribution to the economy and to development, the overall quality of life for a larger portion of the society would be great. In terms of minorities, also I would like to stress the importance of functionality of inclusion. Given the example of Shaipi, who is one of the first Serbian majority populated municipalities who has started the interaction and has become part of the larger settings where it's placed. It's clear they have Brezovica Center, and the designated visitors of Brezovica are majority population. They perceive a functional interest to mingle with the majority population and get a benefit out of it, and it's working. Immediately, a few years after the war, Brezovica was heavily visited by majority population and local communities there, which comprise of major Serbian, majority Serbian community, have benefited from it. Okay. Another issue that I would like to touch upon is people with disabilities. Because we, as a society, we have been very exclusive of these categories, including here lack of even basic physical infrastructure in public buildings and spaces, to physical infrastructure in schools for children with special needs attending those, attending regular classes and education, to lack of budgeting. Now, I would like to stop at this point and say only a few words about how I see the government's role in facilitating inclusion, and that comes mainly in terms of budgetary analysis and budgetary allocation for certain policies, certain categories of people. Now, in Kosovo, let's say, for example, in terms of gender, you have a structure that is comprised of gender equality officers at all level institutions, including local and central level institutions, but these bodies have absolutely no budgets to carry out any activities whatsoever. Moreover, none of the policies or the budgetary planning process in Kosovo does not include, let's say, a gender examination or gender screening in order to assess the impact of given policies separately, men and women. That is one point. The other point comes in terms of respecting the laws that it has passed, namely quotas, which are not represented, especially at the management level in public institutions. Well, that would be about it. I will stop here because I think I've already exceeded my time.